It's funny how life can bring a man to his knees, strip away everything he once held dear, and yet still demand of him one last act of kindness when the world believes he has nothing left to give here. Because that's where our story begins, with a man named Daniel, a quiet, weathered soul who had once worked construction jobs, had once been a husband and a father, but was now reduced to sleeping under a bridge on the outskirts of town with nothing but a tattered backpack and a thin blanket to shield him from the cold night air. And as the sun dipped low behind the horizon, painting streaks of orange and crimson across the sky, Daniel reached into his pocket and felt the rough texture of a few crumpled bills. $8, the last money he owned in the world, and though it wasn't much, to him it meant maybe one more meal, maybe enough coffee to keep his body warm through the night, maybe even a moment's comfort that he hadn't felt in months. And yet fate had something else planned. Something that would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. Something so extraordinary that even he would have shaken his head in disbelief if someone had told him where that $8 was about to lead a broken bar. Because on that very evening, as Daniel shuffled his tired feet toward the convenience store where he thought he might buy a sandwich and maybe a cup of soup, he noticed a man slumped near the edge of the parking lot, a man who looked every bit as rough and worn as he himself felt, except there was something different, something in the man's leather vest, the patches sawn across the back, the faded skull and wings of the Hells Angels motorcycle club that told a story all its own. And Daniel could see the pain in his face, the way his shoulders sagged as if he carried more than the weight of his body. And without thinking, Daniel approached him, because even though he had nothing, he still had compassion, and sometimes that is worth more than gold. "Hey man, you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice raspy from days of cold air and hunger, and the biker looked up with bloodshot eyes, his beard unkempt, his hands trembling as if he hadn't eaten in a while. And with a shaky breath he said, "Nah, brother, broken bar, bike broke down, can't get home, and I haven't had a meal in 2 days." And there was no swagger in his tone, no menace, just a human being who had fallen hard in that moment. And Daniel felt his heart twist inside his chest, because he knew exactly what that kind of hunger felt like. He knew what it meant to have the world look away from you as if you were invisible, and without hesitation, he pulled those last 8 crumpled dollars from his pocket and pressed them into the biker's calloused hand. "Here," Daniel said softly, "it ain't much, but it'll get you something to eat." And for a second the biker just stared, stunned. His lips parted as though he couldn't believe what he'd just seen, and then his eyes filled with tears he quickly tried to hide. Because here was a man who had nothing, absolutely nothing, giving away the last of what little he had to help someone else, and in that simple act, something stirred, something powerful, something that would ripple far beyond the moment neither man yet understood: a broken bar. Now let me pause right here and ask you, Thesa, have you ever wondered how a small act of kindness, something so simple, can spark a chain reaction that grows into something so incredible it could change not just one life but hundreds? Stay with me, because what happened next will leave you breathless. A broken bar. The biker, whose name was Ray, stumbled into the convenience store with Daniel's $8 and bought a hot sandwich and a cup of coffee, and as he sat on the curb eating, Daniel watched from a distance, his own stomach growling. But there was a strange peace that came over him, because he knew he'd done the right thing, and sometimes doing the right thing fills you more than food ever could. Ray came back out, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, and he looked at Daniel with the new kind of respect, the kind of respect that only comes from one man recognizing the soul of another. "Why'd you do it?" Ray asked, his voice heavy with emotion. "You look like you could have used this more than me." Daniel shrugged, offering a faint smile. "Because I know what it feels like to be hungry, brother, and if I was in your shoes, I'd hope someone would do the same." Ray was silent for a moment, then he extended his hand, a firm biker's grip, and said, "Name's Ray, and I ain't never gonna forget what you just did." What Daniel didn't know was that Ray wasn't just any biker. He was a well-respected member of the local Hells Angels chapter, a man who had brothers, dozens of them, who looked out for him like family, and the Hells Angels were known for loyalty, for brotherhood, for always repaying a debt. And in Ray's mind, what Daniel had done wasn't just kindness. It was brotherhood in its purest form, So when Ray got his bike towed the next morning and finally made it back to his chapter house, the first story he told wasn't about his broken down Harley or his rough night up. It was about a homeless man who gave him his last $8 so he wouldn't go hungry. And when those words reached the ears of the other bikers, something powerful shifted, because bikers may look rough on the outside, but loyalty and respect run deep in their veins, and one by one, they nodded, their jaws tight, their eyes filled with a mix of anger at the world that had left Daniel in the gutter and admiration for the man who had given away everything just to help another soul. "We're gonna find him," one biker growled, and the others agreed, because in their code, a man like Daniel wasn't to be left behind, not after showing the kind of heart most people would never understand. And so began a movement, one that Daniel didn't see coming as he spent the night curled beneath his blanket by the bridge, unaware that in just a few days, hundreds of roaring engines would echo down the streets, hundreds of leather jackets would line up in unity, and hundreds of men who had lived lives of rebellion, loyalty, and brotherhood would show up, not to intimidate, not to fight, but to give back and to honor a homeless man whose last $8 had meant more than all the money in the world. But before we get there, before the thunder of those motorcycles fills the air, you need to walk with Daniel through the pain of his past, to understand why he was under that bridge, why he carried so much sorrow, and why giving away his last $8 was more than just kindness, it was redemption. Daniel had once had a wife named Mary and a little girl named Sophie, and if you'd seen them 10 years ago, you'd never believe the man under the bridge was the same one who used to push his daughter on the swings every Saturday morning, laughing as she begged him to go higher. Or the same man who used to come home covered in dust from construction work but smiling because he was building a future brick by brick. But then came the accident, the fall from the scaffolding that shattered his leg and left him unable to work the heavy jobs he'd always relied on, and the medical bills piled up faster than he could pay them, and depression crept in like a shadow, stealing his hope little by little until one day Mary packed up Sophie's things and left, not because she didn't love him, but because the man she once knew had drowned in despair, and though Daniel couldn't blame her, it broke him in ways no bone ever could. He started drinking, started drifting, until the streets claimed him as their own, and for years he became invisible, just another face in the endless line of the forgotten. But deep inside, the man who once loved his family was still there, waiting for a chance to matter again, waiting for one spark of purpose. And that night, with Ray, he found it. And so, my friends, chapter 1 ends with this: a homeless man who gave away his last $8, unaware that the universe was about to pay him back in a way so extraordinary that it would make headlines, inspire thousands, and remind the world that kindness is never wasted. But before you hear the thunder of 300 motorcycles rolling toward Daniel's makeshift shelter, I want to ask you something. If this story has touched your heart so far, if you believe kindness still matters in a world that often forgets the forgotten, then please hit that like button and subscribe. When the morning sun spilled over the horizon, Daniel stirred beneath the ragged blanket that had become his only shield against the world, his stomach empty, his bones aching, and his spirit convinced that life would never change. Yet somewhere deep in his soul, the memory of helping Ray still glowed faintly like a dying ember refusing to fade. And though he had given away his last $8 and now had nothing, there was a strange peace in his heart, a whisper that perhaps he had done something that mattered, even if just for one man. Little did he know, the sound that would soon wake him was not the rustle of passing cars or the footsteps of strangers avoiding his gaze, but the low, thunderous rumble of engines, growing louder and louder until the ground itself seemed to tremble. And when Daniel sat up in confusion, rubbing his tired eyes, what he saw took his breath away: a line of motorcycles stretching further than he could count, chrome glinting in the morning sun, black leather jackets adorned with patches, and faces hard yet softened by a purpose greater than themselves, because 300 bikers had come, not for war, not for show, but for him, for the man who had given away his last $8 with nothing to gain and everything to lose. Daniel's heart pounded in disbelief as the roar of engines filled the air, the sound like rolling thunder promising a storm, and the sight of so many men and women on their bikes riding in perfect formation toward his little corner under the bridge felt like something out of a dream. So surreal he thought perhaps he had died in his sleep and this was heaven's way of telling him he wasn't forgotten, but it was real. Every engine, every face, every soul that had heard Ray's story and decided that loyalty demanded they stand for the man who had stood for one of their own. Ray was at the front, his beard now trimmed, his eyes burning with gratitude, and when the bikes finally came to a halt, the engines one by one cutting into silence until only the sound of birds filled the air, he stepped forward and clasped Daniel's shoulders with both hands. "Brother," he said, his voice breaking, "you gave me your last $8 when you had nothing. You didn't know me, didn't ask for anything, and yet you fed me. That ain't something we forget. So today, we're here to feed you." Daniel shook his head in disbelief, tears welling in his tired eyes. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Why me? I'm just a broken bar nobody." But Ray tightened his grip, his eyes fierce with conviction. "No, Daniel, you're somebody. You're the kind of man this world needs more of, and we're gonna make sure you never feel like nobody again." To this,